July 31st, 1906. Alloway, Michigan, in the heart of the Keweenaw Peninsula's copper country. A 3-year-old boy is playing near his family's home. By evening, he is gone, and no trace of him is ever found. The boy belongs to a family named Carvella, headed by a man listed in surviving records only as John Carvella, a resident of Alloway Township. In 1906, Alloway is a mining community, one of dozens strung along the Keweenaw's copper range, filled with immigrant families drawn north by the promise of steady work in the shafts and stamp mills. The land around these towns is rugged, thick with second-growth forest, pocked with abandoned mine workings, exploration pits, and shafts that had already claimed lives before this boy ever went missing. What exactly happens on the afternoon of July 31st is not recorded in any surviving account. What is known is only the outcome. The child disappears. No body is found. No confirmed sighting follows. And for reasons that remain unclear, the disappearance does not appear in any newspaper at the time it happens. This alone makes the case unusual. In a small mining township, a missing 3-year-old should have been immediate, urgent news. Search parties, church notices, telegrams to neighboring towns. Copper Country in 1906 is a tightly connected network of company towns, where word of a lost child would typically spread fast through the mining company grapevine, if nothing else. Yet no contemporary record of the search survives, if a search took place at all. The story does not surface publicly until more than a year later, and not even in Michigan. On August 23, 1907, a newspaper in Jefferson County, Wisconsin, the Watertown Weekly Leader, runs a short item under the headline, "Unsolved Mystery of Missing Boy." The article recounts the disappearance as something that happened the previous year, treating it already as old, unresolved history rather than breaking news. Why a Wisconsin paper is the outlet to finally report a Michigan disappearance more than a year after the fact is itself never explained. The article names the father. It does not name the boy. This detail alone tells you something about how records were kept and not kept for families like the Carvellas in 1906. Mining communities in the Keweenaw were built largely by immigrant labor. Finnish, Cornish, Italian, Croatian families who came for the copper and often left little behind in official record beyond company payroll ledgers and church baptismal registers, many of which have since been lost, destroyed, or simply never digitized. A 3-year-old with no surviving photograph, no death certificate, and apparently no formal missing person report is not unusual for the period. He is, in the truest sense, a name that history simply failed to keep. What theories exist come almost entirely from the geography itself. The land around Alloway in 1906 is riddled with mining hazards that a small child could wander into without any adult noticing until it was too late. Open shafts, some capped, many not. Standing water in flooded pits. Dense forest that could disorient even an adult within a few hundred yards of a homestead. Any of these could account for a disappearance with no trace. None of them can be confirmed because no formal search, if one happened, left behind any documentation of where it looked or what it found. There is also the simple, uncomfortable possibility that no one has ever ruled out, that something happened to the boy at the hands of another person, and that in a company town where labor disputes, ethnic tension between immigrant groups, and transient mine workers were common, an answer was either never pursued or was quietly buried along with the story itself. The Watertown article offers no resolution, because by the time it was written, there was none to give. It simply states, more than a year after the fact, that a boy from Alloway, Michigan, had vanished and had never been found. No follow-up article exists. No later newspaper revisits the case to say a body was recovered, or a suspect questioned, or a family found closure. The trail simply goes cold in a Wisconsin newspaper archive, one single clipping standing between this child and total historical erasure. For more than a century, the case receives almost no attention. It is not part of Michigan's better-known cold case files, most of which begin no earlier than the mid-20th century, when police departments and state investigators began keeping the kind of formal records that make a case reviewable today. A disappearance from 1906 with no police report, no photograph, and no name for the missing child does not fit into any modern cold case database. It exists, if it exists publicly at all, in the folklore of the region. Passed down as a fragment. A boy who wandered off from a copper mining township and never came home. Remembered more as a piece of local unease than a documented tragedy.
Researchers who have since revisited the Watertown clipping note that Alloway's township's own records from this period are thin. Vital statistics registration in rural Michigan was inconsistent before the 1910s, and mining company towns often handled births, deaths, and even disappearances as internal matters, unless a body turned up requiring a coroner. If John Carvella's son was never found, there may never have been a formal death record to file in the first place. Only a family and a community that simply stopped speaking of him. What remains today is the copper country itself, unchanged in its basic shape since 1906. The old mine workings around Alloway are still there, some capped, some collapsed, many simply left as they were when the mines went quiet decades later. Hikers and history enthusiasts who explore the area's abandoned shafts and stamp mill ruins are, in a literal sense, walking through the same landscape that swallowed a child without explanation more than a century ago. No name, no photograph, no official case file. Only his father's name and one newspaper clipping printed a year late in a state that was not even his own.